Welcome back to part 2 of How to Run Mass, the New Generation. In this episode, we're going to talk about character creation. If you happen to miss the first episode, you can go ahead and check the link down in the description and it will take you to the first episode where we talked about setting the tone for the game. So let's dive right in. So what I like to do with this next portion of the game is I like to have the stack of playbooks in my hand, and the playbooks are what the equivalent for this game's character sheets are. You can print them out, you can get them online, and they are a nice front and back kind of character sheet. And in fact, if you take a look at them, it's very clear that you can fold them in half a certain way, and you really will then have a front page that opens up to a 2-page inside, and then you close that last page and there's a back page of information on the back side. And that's kind of the order that I like to go ahead and fill out the character sheets. But before I hand them out, before I start sending all the stacks of papers out to my players, what I like to do first is I like to read each of the character that they will have a chance to choose from the playbooks. So as an example, and I won't go through in this part one, maybe I won't read all of the ones that you have access to. You can go ahead and take a look at them. But let's read one or two just so we get the idea. So holding it in my hand, I usually have the character sheet in my hand. And right from that, you can read, there's kind of like a little paragraph blurb at the top of that. So you could, if you wanted to cut down on how much time you're going to spend kind of describing the character, you could read just that paragraph. So as an example, if we start with the beacon, what we get is, you don't have to do this. You could probably have a safe, decent, simple life. It'd be nice, but come on. Superpowers, aliens, wizards, time travel? You are out of your depth, but who cares? This is awesome. Everybody should try it. So that's kind of like the opening paragraph for somebody that is the beacon. And that might be enough to say, okay, put that paper down in the center of the table, go to the next playbook, and then you could read that one. So let's read a second one. For the bull, you're big, strong, and tough. You know what fighting really is, and you're good at it. Sure, you've got a soft side too, but you only show that to the people you care about most. Everybody else, they can eat your fist. Another great example of kind of what character you're going to be getting into. But for me, I like to actually have the book because it has a little bit bigger description of what the playbook is and what that character really is about. And there's even some more things that you can read about them that'll help your players decide which of the playbooks that they want. Now, one thing I explained at the very beginning is that I'm typically trying to make sure that there's only one playbook for each character, so that way no player is playing the same type. Not that you have to do that, but it just worked out really well for me when I'm playing this game in one-shots and in short campaigns, that you want a good mix of types of characters instead of having people playing the same one. But let's go ahead and read out of the book. And this starts over on page 93, where we talk about the beacon. So it says, playing the beacon, hopeful, excited, understanding, human. The beacon is the most directly mortal and least strange of all the playbooks. They haven't been shaped by anything else. They could choose to leave this life behind if they wanted, which is exactly the point. They're here because they want to be here. They want to do this. And that gives them a purity compared to the other characters. You can expect NPCs to tell you that you don't really belong here after all. You don't have the extras that most people associate with superheroes. A central conflict for the beacon is providing yourself and making a case for why you actually belong. Ultimately, your character is all about their drives. Those give you objectives, things to aim towards and try to do, so make sure you pick drives that really interest you. Trying to accomplish your drives might lead you into trouble just as much as it might lead you to triumph, but they'll always push you toward the key conflict. Do you actually deserve to be here? And that's exactly what you want. So that's the conflict that the beacon type character is really working with, because they don't have some of the powers that you would consider to be superpowers. They're more about skills and training and things like that versus, superhuman strength or mutant abilities or psychokinetic whatever, What I also like to do is I like to flip it over, and there's some things on here where it talks about notes on your moves and extras, and those are pretty good for people to read if they want to. But then the last thing I read here to my players is inspiration for the beacon. So I like to read this because they give us good ideas of characters that would fit this playbook. So Kate Bishop of the Young Adventures, Artemis and Arrowette from Young Justice, Doug Ramsey from the New Mutants, Kamala Khan from Miss Marvel, Gertrude Yorkies from Runaways, Felicity Smoke from Arrow, and Stephanie Brown from Detective Comics. All people that could fit in as the beacon, right? And at that point, then I would set that paper on the table and I would move on to the next one. So we'd look at the bull and we could say, okay, playing the bull, gruff, tough, passionate, big-hearted. The bull's a heavy hitter with big feelings. They get into a lot of fights, both interpersonal and superheroic, especially thanks to their signature move, the bull's heart. A lot of the time, they'll be angry. They're a big, gruff wrecking ball, and you should have fun smashing them into things. Get into fights, emotional and physical, be blunt. That's the way of the bull. The biggest asset in playing your bull is your core move, the bull's heart. It's your way of signaling to yourself and the whole table that you're interested in scenes with particular characters. Pay attention to it, and try to get those bonuses as much as possible. Every playbook's moment of truth matters and may shift the direction of the character, but the bull's in particular is significant. The bull has made to be a fighter by someone else, and when you use your moment of truth, the story of the bull's origins becomes way more important. Use your moment of truth when you know you want to inject the element of backstory into the game moving forward. So it's talking about a little bit of mechanics. It's talking a little bit about how to play the character. It's talking about their motivations. And then we flip it over again and we see inspiration for the bull. Miss America Chavez from Young Avengers, Superboy from Young Justice, X-23 from X-Men, Molly Hayes from Runaways. I love Molly Hayes. And then Hazmat from Avengers Academy. So by going through these and reading those from the book, I then place the paper again in the center of the table. What I'm doing is I'm controlling the amount of information they're getting in the very beginning as not to overwhelm them. I think too often if you just have the papers just laying out and then they all sit at the tables and they all start shuffling papers between them and they're trying to get one paper to move on to another so somebody else can read it and they're really not sure what's going on, it ends up taking longer than if they just listen to you explaining these characters, giving the motivation, putting that emphasis on things, and then reading about what other types of characters they may have heard of that would fit that mold or that type of character. And what you might notice with the playbooks is a playbook is not like a character you would think of in a regular RPG, the way these are created. I think in normal, I don't want to say normal as if this is not normal. I want to say in other maybe popular role-playing games, you will have classes that are based on the type of skills they're going to have. So if it's superhero, you might have somebody that's a blaster, you might have somebody that's a tank, you might have somebody that's a magician, you might have somebody that's technology, you might have somebody that's hyper reflexes, and that all kind of keys into what their powers are, right? Or if you think of it as a medieval role-playing game, or like a Dungeons and Dragons or a Pathfinder or something like that, you're thinking of, clerics and fighters and rogues and barbarians and things like that. Again, it's the abilities they have that define them. But what I find interesting about Mass, the new generation, it's more about their motivations and the things that they struggle with are defining the different type of characters, not necessarily exactly what type of power they have. And in fact, in Beacon, it didn't say anything about what type of power it had. In the Bull, it talked about they're strong and they like to fight. That's getting closer to being like you could almost say like a tank. But even then, it more emphasized the relationships between certain characters and how you want to interact with them to move forward and how to think of it yourself and how you kind of solve problems with brute force, or maybe you're just mad and angry all the time. It's about your feelings and it's about your relationships more than it is about your power set. And that's a very interesting thing. And you want to get that point across when you're setting up your game. And I think the best way you can do that is by reading these out. Let's do one more before we move on. So there's the Delinquent, which was a pretty popular one that people like. There's the Doomed. And some of these, it even says in the book, like if there's a few of these that have some special type of mechanics that if you're not familiar with them or you're not comfortable with using them or you feel like they're going to be a little bit too hard for the players to understand or fit, you can always just leave that playbook out. You can only put out the ones that you think that you want to have in the scenario or in the adventure or in the one shot that you're going to do. Let's talk about the Janus. I think that's another good example one here. So it says, wake up, breakfast, school, work, homework, sleep, repeat. It burns you up, being stuck in this life, unable to make a real difference. That is, until you put on the mask, and then you can be somebody else, a hero. So playing the Janus, you're stressed, responsible, dual, and heroic. The Janus is two people in one, and their struggle is about balancing that paradox. You have your regular life and all its responsibilities on one side, and your superheroic life and all its madness on the other. And ultimately, you don't want to give up either one, but they both pull, and they pull at you, building up the tension until you feel like you're going to snap. That's okay, though. Your story's all about that tension and overcoming it, especially thanks to the people around you. Cultivate relationships with NPCs and PCs. They're all important to your overarching story. Pay close attention to your mask. When do you wear it? When do you take it off? Who knows about your secret identity? Who doesn't? For you, more than any other playbook, it matters which overt guise you're in, which mask you're wearing, and which face you're presenting to the outside world. So this one's about internal struggle with the duality of being a superhero, or of being at least a superhero where the identity is not known. It's the idea, it's a very common comic book trope of basically like a Spider-Man at that point. And even if we go to the inspirations for the Janus, we see Miles Morales, Ultimate Spider-Man, Blue Beetle, Young Justice, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, Thor, Jane Foster version Thor, Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. These are all great examples of comic book heroes that struggle with trying to balance both their real world life and their regular life and being a superhero in disguise. That's very interesting. And another thing that points out is we've just heard Kamala Khan on 2 different playbooks. So even though a comic book character may seem like they fit one category, in reality, if you think about these categories as motivations, a lot of times comic book characters could fit in more than one of these playbooks. So there's more than one way you could try to play a very Kamala Khan type character. You can play it with the Janus and go that route, or you can play it with the Beacon and go that route and try to see how that works out. So that's a powerful thing to point out to your players. So there's a lot of good things in here. We got the Legacy and the Nova. We've got the Outsider, and we've got the Protege. These are all good characters. Got the Transformed is our last one, and that ends up on page 111. So at the end of that, you now have all of your characters, pieces of paper, all of your character sheets, all of your playbooks sitting in the center of the table. So at that point, I've read them all, and now I say to all the characters, all right, so now which one do you guys want to play? And we spread them out, and people start grabbing ones that they gravitated to or ones that sounded interesting to them. They maybe take 1 or 2 and they read both, and then they start thinking about it. And you try to help them along. You try to let them talk it out. You try to encourage, what way are you thinking about going? What type of character are you thinking about playing? And you're trying to talk to them about not necessarily thinking about the power set so much, but more about the reason you're a hero, how you became a hero, why you're a hero, the type of hero you want to be, what are the motivations. And that will help them choose the playbook that they want to play in this adventure. Now, once you have that, and let's say you have 2 or 3, maybe you have 4 people around the table. They've all picked some playbooks and they're ready to start getting into it. Now, here's the big thing. Have them go in a very specific order on these character sheets as filling them out. So they're going to want to jump ahead. They're going to want to go ahead and do a bunch of things, but just slow them down a little bit and get their attention and say, okay, let's start filling these out. So now that we've handed them out, we say, I want you to fill out the page 1. And if you folded them right for you already, page 1 ends up being the front part that tells it what playbook it is. And in fact, one thing that I think you can do as a neat little tip is maybe go in and just put in page numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's just a single piece of paper. And that way, when you're talking about it, it's easy to refer to on page number 1. Go ahead and do this. Okay. All right. So when you're looking on page 1, so like right now I'm looking at the bull, and on page number 1, it says hero name, real name if it's different, and then your look. And on look, when you explain it to them, say, okay, I want everybody to come up with their name and their real name or their secret identity and their superhero name. And then I want you to also kind of come up with the look of your superhero. And what you can do is where it says look, it shows things like ambiguous, man, shifting, transgressing, woman, Asian, South Asian, Black, Hispanic, Latino, Indigenous, Middle Eastern, white. These are things that you can circle on the character sheet so it's easy for them to remember, or they can just write them on the side there once they've chosen the ones. And these are just guidelines. If there's just one other thing they want to do in there that's not quite represented, then they certainly could add something in. But these are just to give people ideas on the fly as they've just picked up the playbook. So have them do page 1 and then tell everybody, okay, everybody fill out page number 1 and everybody tell me when you're done. And let them talk about it a little bit. Let them communicate. Now, sometimes you might have somebody that says, I just don't know what I want my name to be yet. And I'll be like, okay, you got everything else taken care of. Then let's move on. We can think of a name and coming up, but we'll need one before too long. So that give them a little chance to talk about it, but move on to the next page for them. So page 2 talks about their labels. And then it shows things like labels, conditions, backstory, when our team first came together, relationships, and influence, right? And then when they look over on page 3, they see things like, for the bull, it's like bull move and bull heart. But if they were on the legacy, it talks about beacon move, or I'm sorry, if they were on the beacon, it would be on beacon moves and drives. And then if I go down to delinquent, it's delinquent moves. Or if I go down to the doom, it's the doom track, the doom signs, and sanctuary. So each one will have some different things, but you want to try to narrow them in and just say, okay, we want to fill out your labels. Now your labels are already set for whatever playbook you have, but you are allowed to add a +1 to any one of the labels you wish. So they get to add +1 at character creation. Now they may say, well, what are danger, freak, savior, superior, and mundane? And that's where you say, okay, before we go any further, before you guys do anything more, I want to explain these to you so you know which one to pick and how that's going to help you with deciding when you pick your powers, also how that's going to affect your labels. So the next thing I read them is from page 43, what has to do with the labels. And I said the 5 labels are danger, freak, savior, superior, and mundane. And then I read it out to them. Danger, seeing yourself as threatening, strong, bloody-knuckled, and risky. Other people see you as danger when they think they should steer clear of you because you might bring them harm. You see yourself as danger when you believe you can take down other dangerous threats and when you think you yourself are a threat to other people. So that's if you have a high number in danger, people see you or want to avoid you because you look dangerous. You look like you might harm them, or you feel like you might harm people. Freak, seeing yourself as strange, unusual, unique, and powerful. Other people see you as a freak when they think you're odd, unlike them, something unnatural, or outside of their understanding. You see yourself as a freak when you accept and own the things you can do that no one else can, and when you think you don't belong with the people in the world around you. So again, a high freak is going to be somebody who stands out, somebody who people see as odd, but then a very low freak is going to be a very mundane type person, somebody who fits into the crowd very well, somebody who says, oh, I never would have ever thought that person was a superhero. They're the next door neighbor kid and he mows the lawn every day or whatever. I never saw anything weird about him, so that would be a very low freak. Savior, seeing yourself as defending, guarding, protecting, and stalwart. Other people see you as a savior when they think of you as noble or self-sacrificing, or a bit overbearing and moralizing. You see yourself as a savior when you think of yourself as a martyr, someone who gladly sacrifices to protect and defend others. Superior, seeing yourself as smart, capable, crafty, and quick. Other people see you as superior when they think you're the smartest person in the room, an arrogant and egotistical jerk. You see yourself as superior when you think you're cleverer than everyone else and when you know exactly what to say to make the people around you do what you want. And then we finish off with mundane, seeing yourself as normal, human, empathetic, and understanding. Other people see you as mundane when they think of you as all too normal and uninteresting, but also comprehending and sympathetic. You see yourself as mundane when you think you're regular, just a person, not special, and focused on normal things like feelings and emotions. So each of the playbooks are going to have a set grouping of these labels, and throughout the game these can shift, and these are going to be how people view you, how you view yourself, or how you own those labels that have been put on you. Do you reject them? Do you accept them? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? So those are the kinds of things that we're going to play in the game. And that's another thing that makes Mass the New Generation unique, because instead of stats like how strong am I, how fast am I, how much damage can I take, how smart am I, how wise am I, what's my charisma, this is more about how people view you or have labeled you. And that's what you're fighting, or that's what you're defining yourself, is all these different labels and how they come together to define who you are. And whether you accept that, or you fight against it, or you work to change them, or somebody changes them when you didn't want them to. Okay? So that's a very important part of the game. Now, knowing that, I mentioned to them, add your +1, but take a look at your abilities, the things that you're going to be choosing as your basically your abilities or your powers, so that you can kind of line up your label with how your powers work. Okay? So if I go up to, as an example, let's go back up to the very first one, the beacon. And I'm looking at it, so I get a danger of -1. So as a beacon, people think I'm pretty safe. They don't think I'm going to be the one that hurts them. My freak is a -1, so they don't see that I'm odd or out of place. I'm kind of the opposite of that. Savior is a +2, so I'm very much about putting myself in the line of danger to save innocence, right? Almost as high as it can possibly go, in fact. This is very much a character who puts others' interest ahead of theirs. Superior, right at 0, so it's like right at a neutral area. And then mundane, +2. They could look just like, could be a normal person. So very mundane type character, very relatable character to people that are not superheroes. Now, when I look it up, when I start thinking about, okay, I want to put a +1 somewhere, I'm going to look over to where my moves are, or my abilities, or whatever it's called for your playbook. In this case, for Beacon, it's called moves. So I get to choose 2 of those, and they've got like straight up creeping, no powers, and not nearly enough training, won't let you down, pretty much a superhero, come on, Lucky, suck it, Domitian? Yeah, I think that's what that word is. And so I'm looking at these, and some are about roll savior instead of danger. Here's another one where it talks about roll your dice plus savior for pretty much a superhero. Another one is won't let you down, just add 2 to the roll. So that's a neutral one, kind of. Here's one straight up creeping plus mundane. And then, so if I'm looking at these, no powers, you can roll plus mundane instead of normal. So it sounds like to me, mundane and savior are a couple of the abilities that I might want, or I might be rolling against. So I might try to synergize that. Or I can try to customize my character and say, I am playing the beacon, but I want to maybe have a little bit more superior, or maybe I don't want danger to be as low as it is. Maybe I do want them to be a little on edge when I'm in the room. I don't want them just to think I'm not dangerous type thing, and maybe I'll move that to a 0. You can come up with any number of reasons why you might choose your label, and then go ahead and pick your beacon moves. So at that point, you should now have your labels decided, hopefully your abilities or moves for your playbook. The next piece that we're going to go through, and it just depends on what character sheet you're working on, because some of them are ordered just slightly different. Well, when they see conditions, you just mention to them that none of them are checked. These are things that happen to you in the game, and we'll kind of explain those as we go. So right now we can leave those unchecked. We're going to come to backstory in just a moment. Yeah, and so some characters, so like Beacon's going to pick their drives. Bull is going to pick their abilities and their bull moves and the bull's heart. So you want to encourage them to do that. If they're playing the Delinquent, they're going to want to pick their Delinquent moves. If they're playing the Doomed, they've got to do some things here with Doom Signs and the Sanctuary. And they can just, the character sheet itself, the playbook itself will walk them through exactly what it is. So the Janus has abilities to choose. And these are just give you ideas, but if you have some other idea that you think would fit with it, it's okay to improvise that in. Janus moves, secret identity, those kinds of things. So hopefully they go over those. And I always tell them, leave the backstory, when our team first came together, relationships and influence to the end. Do the other pieces of your playbook first. So your labels, your moves, your abilities, any of those types of things. Once everybody has those, the next thing I do is, now that we're going to get to backstory, and I tell them this is why we wait for backstory. What I want to do is I want to place out on the table for the adventure somewhere around 1 or 2, maybe 3 villains. And I happen to have the villain card set from Mass, the New Generation. But if you don't, you could still just put out, little 3x5 index cards that you drew up, or you could maybe print off some artwork from the internet, cut them out, and then put them on the table and say, okay, these are some villains that are out there, and these are some of the people that we're going to kind of that have run into your characters before, has run into your heroes before. And this is also the point where you tell them that as heroes, they have just come together as a team. So it's not like we're going to role play out the very first time they fought villains. Our game is going to take place a little bit after that. But building our backstory and when our team first came together and our relationships is all going to talk about how that stuff happened. And so I might put out, so like in this example, I've got an upcoming game that I'm going to be doing, and I might put out their Rosa Rook, I might put out their Iron Flag, and I might put out their Blue Hydra. And I don't even need to tell them too much about them. What I can say is maybe just a couple of things. I can tell them that Rosa Rook built her company and reputation by successfully capitalizing on the scientific study of metahumans. Okay, a Bronze Generation villain. Iron Flag is an android created during World War II by the Third Reich. This is a Gold Generation villain. So a lot of the Gold Generation heroes fought against this type of villain, or this villain exactly. And then Blue Hydra is, and I might not say who the name is if they have an identity or something. It might just be, the rumors are that this was a brilliant scientist and she was infected by some type of parasite. And then I put out there the Blue Hydra, and that's a Silver Generation villain. And what that does is it places them out there to give them a couple of things where people can, as they're creating their playbooks and their superheroes that they're going to be building, they can have some ways to tie them in by picking one of these villains. And usually our adventure is going to incorporate one of these villains, or maybe a couple of these villains in some way. Okay? At that point, then we say, okay, everybody have that. Now I want you to do your backstory. So they're going to look at their backstory questions, and I want them to right next to whatever the question is, I want them to write out what the answer is to that. So you give them a little bit of time to go through. So like I'm looking here at the Janus one, and the backstory says, when did you first put on your mask? Why do you keep a secret identity? Who outside of the team knows about your dual identity? Who thinks the worst of your masked identity? Why do you care about the team? Okay, so they're going to be trying to figure those things out for whatever playbook they're playing. When it seems like they're done, you give them some time to go ahead and create that. Then you start with however you want to do it, the person on your right or the person on your left, and you have them read the backstory question out loud to everybody, and then the answer. Okay, so if they say, when did you first put on the mask? And they talk about there was a grocery store robbery, and maybe they were in there and somebody was about to be hurt. So they duck behind maybe like a counter or an aisle, and they put a ski mask over or just something to cover their face. And they use their powers for the first time and stop this robbery from happening. It was the very first time they decided to stop anything. When they say that, immediately interject with a few questions, and you want to be writing these down. So when they say something like that, say, oh, okay, so what was the name of the convenience store that this happened at? Get some details that slows them down in thinking about their backstory and starts to flesh it out. And what you're searching for here is things that you can bring up in the adventure later on. So they might say, oh, it was the Pocono gas station. Or you're like, okay, that seems like, and you write that down and talk about go ahead, describe exactly what was the thing you put over your head and where did you find it? Was it something you carried with you? Was it something that was sitting on a shelf of some sort? Give them some leadway to be really creative about it. Then let them go on to their next question. Why do you keep your secret identity? Why don't you tell other people? And, when you hear one, who outside of the team knows about your dual identity? And maybe they say, well, it's my brother who knows about it. And you're like, oh, okay, so what's your brother's name? And are they just a normal person? Are they also a superhero? And you can go into these other things and you can start to bring them in, write them down, and then eventually you can try to work some of that information back into the main story to make it really feel relevant. You'll go around the whole entire table once everybody has introduced their backstory and who they are. And during that time, a lot of time I have them also give their description so we can find out what they look like. What their costume looks like is another good thing I ask them about. And we don't even talk about powers quite yet, but just their costume and their physical features at this point. Once everybody is done, so once you finish your backstory, you've introduced your characters, and then now the next piece is determine when the team first came together. So each playbook has a different question that you can answer. So if I go to, let's say we have Janice is playing, and what you want to do is when our first team came back together, there's a certain order that you want to read the relationships. A good place to find this is on the GM sheet, and it talks about what order you should ask these questions in. So you look through this list, and the person who should answer things first should be the bull. Then it should go to the Nova, the Outsider, the Janice, the Delinquent, the Doomed, the Legacy, the Transform, the Protege, and the Beacon. But if you only have a couple of those, then just go in the order of which ones you do have. So let's say we have a Nova, and so that's where we're going to start, and we're going to let the Nova, and we make sure we explain this. You get to answer this question, and everybody else is going to get their answer their question, but try not to help this person answer their own question, right? So we look to the Nova and we say, okay, when you fought this superhero, you defeated this dangerous enemy, and I might even ask, who was this enemy? And they have the three that were out there, right? They might say, oh yeah, we defeated Iron Flag. Like, okay, good. So when you did that as the Nova, when our team first came together questions, we destroyed our surroundings in the fight, but where did this fight happen and what did you actually destroy? So that lets the Nova kind of set where the location of this fight happened and encourage them to be the ones that own that and set that place. And then let's say we have a Janice, so then we go to there, we skip over maybe Outsider because we didn't have one, and then we go to Janice and we say, we saved the life of somebody important, either to the city or to us. Who was it, and why are they important? So then the Janice gets to answer that piece, and you're writing this information down as you go, and you go through all of the characters. It's important, I think, that you go through the order. Now, a variation on that, I tried it in a different couple of games because I did it where I only asked the questions of the playbooks I had present. So if I had 4 people, we answered 4 of those questions in the right order. And then at another one of the games, if I made sure that we asked all of the questions, and if we had one where nobody was playing it, like nobody played the bull, then I let the whole table decide and kind of come up with something together. But when it came to their playbook question, I made sure that I said, okay, everybody, now this is the question for them to answer. Let's let them answer it. here's the question, and then we went over it. So hopefully that makes sense. You can find that on the GM sheet if you want to know the order. It's also in the book too. Now, at that point, we're very close to being done, but we still need to do relationships. So you're going to go again, either to your right or to your left, it doesn't matter how you start, and say, okay, let's go over the relationships. Now, the relationships are how you tie together with the other members of your superhero team. So you're writing in these areas the names of the other people you're going to be playing with. So if we're using the example of the Janice here again, that relationship says blank knew you were a civilian life first, or knew you from your civilian life first. And then you refused to tell blank your secret identity when they asked. So looking around the table, they're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to choose this person to be the one who knew me from civilian life first, and then found out maybe I was a superhero. And this person over here, they've asked me who my secret identity is, and I've never told them. And that starts to build connections between the characters. Let's say we have, let's go back up to Beacon, and let's take a look at Beacon real quick. So in Beacon, that's the bowl, there we go. In Beacon, the relationship says blank is awesome, and you take every chance you get to hang out with them. And then the second one is you've got to prove yourself to blank, or this person, because before you feel like a real hero. So one of them you really like, and you just like to hang out with one of them. And then one of them you look up to, and you're trying to prove to them that you're good, and you're trying to prove to yourself that you're a real hero just like them, right? So you've got to prove it to yourself and to that person before you ever feel like you'll actually be a hero. So that's a very cool mechanic to then tie in the characters all together. The last part is of influence, and you can just go by whatever it says on your playbook. So as a Beacon, it says you're excited to be here. Give influence over you to 3 other teammates. So we have these influence cards that you can use, or you can use counters, and you can pass them out, and you can write them on your character sheet also if you want to do it that way, or your playbook. And you can say, this person has influence over me. And when you talk about influence, they might ask, well, what exactly is influence? And again, I pick up the book and I say, let me read to you what influence is, just so we all have a good idea of how it works. All right, so on page 51, we have influence. Finally, each character gives out some influence to their teammates. Influence in mass is a binary resource. Someone either has it over you or they don't. If someone has influence over you, it means you care about what they think, say, or do about you. It means their words carry weight with you and can change how you see yourself. By default, in mass, all adults hold influence over the PCs. This section of the character creation is about sharing influence amongst teammates. Each playbook has a section that describes how much influence they give out to their teammates. Sometimes you have to make a choice about your initial demeanor, how you come off to the others first thing. Other times it just tells you how many characters you give influence to. Choose which teammates you give influence to and hand them one of your influence tokens to market. You can always choose to give out more influence if you think your character cares about somebody's words, then you should give them influence over you if you don't already have it. But you have to have at least give out as much as your playbook tells you to. When handing out influence, think about whose words your character most cares about at the moment, will most likely to be able to change how they see their self. Influence comes and goes over the course of play, so don't worry too much about this initial setup. So don't worry about hoarding it at that point either. It kind of comes and goes. And that's about as much as they need to know in influence, because once we get into the game, we will have opportunities where they see how influence works and then how they can get more of it or trade it around and do different things. We don't want to bog character creation down with trying to explain every mechanic. We're going to bring up certain things that happen in the adventure or in the mission or in the story arc that's going to illustrate those things and how they work, how the game is played. Now, that is the last part of creating your character, of creating your hero. At that point, we are ready to go ahead and start the game. So I hope this has helped out. I hope you will be able to look through those different pages in the Mass A New Generation book, and you can also look at the GM sheet that can help you on character creation. The very first page talks about the steps and the order for when your team first came together, which is an important piece to remember. And then also you can always look at the playbooks because a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory also. Stay tuned for more. When we come back with episode 3, we're going to talk about setting up the first part of the game and how to introduce playable mechanics so that you can lead into more and more storytelling throughout your session. Hope you enjoyed this. Can't wait to see you in the next one. So thanks for checking out this episode. Hopefully it will help you out in the game you're about to run. If you want to ask any questions, you can use the comments below. You can also send them to me at SirLucien Gaming on Twitter. You can check out other things that are happening on the channel, obviously here on the YouTube channel, or if you want to see some of the games that we host live, you can go over to twitch.tv/SirLucien, and you can see some of the live play stuff that we do over on that channel. Hopefully you hit that subscribe button. Hopefully you hit that like button. It helps the channel out. Can't wait to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.